ally Japan out of favor, but non-ally India in favor in the rush to seal a deal with President Trump. New Delhi says, quote, a big, good, beautiful deal is on the cards, while Tokyo says its focus is now on investments, not tariffs.
With little to show for any trade deal with Washington, the fate of Japan's Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba and his minority government hangs in the balance as campaigning for the upper house election begins today.
And that vote is set to take place in less than 3 weeks' time. More than 500 candidates are vying for a place in the 248-member body.
Mr. Ishiba says that his goal is for the Liberal Democratic Party to retain a simple majority. This means it must secure at least 50 out of the 125 seats up for contention. A poor result would not immediately lead to change of government, though it could trigger a leadership change within the LDP or regrouping of the governing coalition.
Observers say this will be a crucial vote for the Prime Minister after his ruling coalition lost its majority in the lower House of Representatives last year. While dwindling wages expected to be on voters' minds when they cast their ballots later this month, so is the issue of soaring rice prices, which has sparked complaints both at home and abroad.
A U.S. leader, Donald Trump, has accused Japan of not buying American rice while casting doubt on being able to reach a trade deal with the country. Now, Mr. Ishiba, however, has pledged to not make any concession on safety or other areas in tariff negotiations.
All right, we are joined by William Pesek, who's columnist and author. Thank you for joining us today, William. So domestically, let's start with that. Mr. Ishiba's approval ratings have been inching up slowly, mostly due to measures taken to combat the soaring rice prices. And polls show that over 50% of Japanese are actually against increasing rice imports. So how will Mr. Ishiba's handling of these U.S. tariff negotiations play into the upper house election on the 20th of this month?
Well, I think, it's important to point out that Donald Trump, when he came to office a second time, he expected Japan to be a very easy mark. I think the reason was during his first term, then Prime Minister Shinzo Abe really did bow to Trump's every whim. He basically threw praise Trump's way. He sat with him at the Group of Seven lunchroom when no one else would. In many ways, he gave Trump gifts. He was very, very obsequious towards Trump. Prime Minister Ishiba has been a very, very different character. And I think that Prime Minister Ishiba's standpoint has been, look, we'll negotiate a trade deal, but what kinds of concessions is the U.S. willing to make? I don't think Trump expected Japan to ask that question. And what Japan is also saying is, what is the rush? Japan concluded a free trade agreement with the U.S. in basically 6 years ago, in 2019. Trump wants another one. And I think Ishiba-san is saying, look, we'll negotiate, but how about a year or two? And I don't think that Trump world expected him to respond in that manner. With the election coming up, I think there's a good argument that his numbers are doing a little better because the Japanese have been pleasantly surprised by how, I'd say, firm he's been in the face of Trump's bullying.
William, we've been hearing a lot of rice talk from Mr. Trump. I wonder why the U.S. leader is so fixated on rice in these trade talks, especially when Japan already imports American rice. I mean, they bought nearly, $300 million worth of American rice last year.
Well, Trump doesn't strike me as a rice guy, which makes his fixation on rice very interesting. In many ways, rice is a sort of, it's a microcosm of the Japan-U.S. trade relationship. The Japanese don't really eat foreign rice in general. It's not a U.S. thing. Japanese don't really eat Thai rice either, for the most part. They will in a pinch. But there have been scandals here in recent years where certain bento companies have been caught using American or Thai rice in their food. The Japanese believe that their rice is different. It's more refined. It's just a better brand of rice, if you will. And the Japanese are very proud of it, and they don't necessarily like importing it. It's kind of like asking the French to drink American wine. They don't really want to do it. We can discuss whether or not that's wise or not. But I think for Japan, they're just not very keen on importing U.S. rice. I think, for Ishiba, it really is a kind of, it's a painless way to placate Trump to import more U.S. rice because the Japanese aren't going to buy it anyway.
And we know that Mr. Trump has cast doubt on a potential deal with Japan. William, do you think there is a real risk of talks breaking down, or is this part of his high-pressure tactics to extract last-minute concessions from Japan?
I think Japan is running circles around Trump. And I think Japan realizes in many ways that Trump's big focus is China. And you mentioned in the intro that the U.S. and China have some sort of a trade agreement. But I would argue that the U.S. and China have an agreement to talk about an agreement down the road. There's a kind of framework to talk about a framework. And I think Japan sees that happening, and they realize that there's scope for Japan to slow walk this. And that's exactly what Japan is doing. At some point, when Trump is desperate for a significant trade agreement, he might come to Japan and say, look, we'll do a kind of, moving the deck chairs around agreement that doesn't change much. Just give me a win. And Japan will say, OK, we'll sign this deal, which doesn't change anything. The first time the U.S. and Japan signed a Trump trade deal in 2019, Trump agreed to leave automobiles off the table, which when you think about a trade deal between the U.S. and Japan, if you're not talking about autos, what's the point? So in many ways, Japan is looking for another non-deal deal. And they're hoping that Trump will be so desperate for a deal. A deal with the UK, let's be honest, doesn't matter because the US has a trade surplus with the UK. So that's just a document you sign. Vietnam does matter, but I'm not sure that this is changing the trade relationship fundamentally. Japan is a much bigger win for Trump, and Ishiba knows it. And that's why he's playing hard to get. And I think he's doing the right thing.
Well, if the U.S. does follow through with that new tariff of 35% from 24% after July 9th, what are the short and medium-term implications for Japan's GDP growth? And how do you expect the Bank of Japan to adjust its monetary policy stance? I mean, how constrained is the BOJ really in responding to this trade development?
Well, 30%, 35% tariffs for Japan would be devastating because on top of that, you have 25% auto tariffs. Now, the auto industry is 10% of Japan's GDP. It's more than 8% of the workforce. So you have 30 to 35% reciprocal tariff. You have a 25% auto tariff. This is a headwind that Japan didn't need in 2025 when the economy is sort of flatlining as it is. And the question for the Bank of Japan, which has been raising interest rates for the last basically year and a half, is your next move to cut rates or to raise rates? And I think that's an open question. Complicating things is that Japan's inflation rate is 3.7%, which is about double the BOJ's target. So they're not in a position to really cut rates, but they can't really raise rates because the economy is not doing terribly well. So if you're the BOJ, you're caught between a rock and a hard place, and odds are you're just on hold until further notice.
And William, given that Japan is both a key trade partner and also military ally of the U.S., could a breakdown or any disruption in these trade talks damage broader U.S.-Japan alliance, especially at a time when cooperation is crucial to counterbalance China's influence in Asia?
It could. I mean, in many ways, I always think of Japan as having somewhat of an abusive relationship with the U.S. government, right? I mean, they are equals on some level, but the U.S. does defend Japan. The U.S. demanded it that way after World War II, after 1945. And that arrangement still sticks. I'm not sure Donald Trump fully understands that particular history. But it is a very difficult issue for Japan to navigate. But I think in many ways, Trump has to be careful here because you have seen ties between Japan and South Korea improve. So in many ways, Japan and South Korea are so horrified by the Trump 2.0 presidency that they're actually talking. Japan and South Korea also could be, in many ways, moving closer to China from an economic and a geopolitical standpoint, because they might actually view China at the moment as the more credible and stable power. And that's the kind of side effect that that Trump world has to be careful about. The last thing they want to do is take, what is arguably Japan's most important ally in the world, Japan, and push it into the arms of China. And that's an open question in the year ahead.
Okay, just to wrap, William, what do you then see happening between Japan and the U.S. in the few days left to the 9th of July deadline?
Well, I think you're going to see a lot of rancor back and forth, but Japan's trade negotiators cannot even get in to see Scott Bessent. So in many ways, I don't expect a lot of fireworks in the days ahead. I think you'll see some comments back and forth. You could, there is an option that we could see some kind of like non-trade deal, trade deal in the next few days, just to, sort of walk away and say we've done something. But I think in many ways, this trade relationship between Japan and the U.S., it's a lot more complicated than the Trump folks ever expected. And I think the Prime Minister Ishiba is handling it the right way as elections bear down on him.
Thank you so very much, columnist and author William Pesek.
Thank
with
you.
3 women trying to chat with you. You really took a lot from us. Thank you.